Namaskar, this is my 30th lecture on a pressing issue that I've been asked to talk about, that's love jihad, whether it's a reality. But in order to analyze it, we have to again go back and talk about some of the feminist theories and so forth, because after all, this is about, the transaction of women. Let me remind the class again of some of the real feminist issue in colonialism. I talked about this in a previous video. Post-colonial feminism deals with class, colonialism, gender. All the nations that we have now are a result of European colonization of the 17th, 18th century. So a particular class was empowered who acted as an in-between between the colonial masters and the vast number of people. And it's from women of that class that became the women of the nation, because these nations are artificial nations, artificial borders and so forth. State and racial formation. The state formation, for example, Nigeria. There was no such thing as Nigeria before the colonization, European colonization. They are disparate tribes. So when the state was formed, it was modeled on the European state. And so, of course, all the legacies of the European state will be there. Women and multinational corporations, we know this very well, that with new globalization, small factories, maquiladoras are there where women's labors are mostly used. Why? Because they won't unionize, and they're docile labors. And then women as the other, women from the first world, feminist theories, they're writing about these other women, which means you're not giving any voice to women in post-colonial nations like Nigeria and so forth, Kenya, and what do they want? So the last one is very important. We have to bring out the oral histories of these women. And these together form the core of the post-colonial feminist theories. Now, in order to understand love jihad, I'll go back and there will be a little bit of repetition in this video. Nonetheless, it's important you go through this. Otherwise, if we don't put in the context, we cannot understand love jihad. So what is the context? Let's try to understand the context of Africa and then the Indian subcontinent. Please go to our organization's website, which is sowaka.in, and all my writings are there with similarities of the jihadi colonization of Africa and the subcontinent. Now, so I talked about this earlier, that when the Islamic invasion happened, which by the way was somehow constructed as an indigenous African religion, which of course it's not, it came from elsewhere. They lived in an enclavement, which is a separate community. Why? Because again, we talked about this, that everyone in a village were bound by blood or kinship, from the chief to the ordinary people. And the chief was mainly the keeper of the ancestral values. It's a different religion. It's not so much codified in Africa. They were well treated, the protected minorities. They were Muslim traders, and then the peers and the imams, they came in. But they were not allowed to mix because there was no blood intermixture. Now, were there mixtures? Of course there is. When a group of people are staying in the same place as you are, except in different enclavement, there are going to be mixtures. First of all, many people from the indigenous community used to go there to get healed, to get charms and amulets and so forth. Because these healing was not probably available in the indigenous community, and many were disenfranchised with the indigenous community, and that's why they went. What's very interesting is my research shows that many unborn children were given Muslim names. Why? Because there was a tradition in the indigenous African community, it's also true in the Indian subcontinent, that if there is a lot of child mortality, the next mother is pregnant and they're very scared that the ancestor is going to take the child away. That's how they conceived of it. So they used to put disfigured marks and bad names to the children. These are all prejudices within the community. Now, if they thought that if they give Muslim names, then the ancestors who won't take a stranger child, because a Muslim is outside the community. He's not part of that kinship structure. So they lived in enclavement, but they mixed somewhat with the local people. The other thing is very important, and I talked about this earlier, is the art of writing. The indigenous community didn't have writing. It was all oral. So the chiefs used some of the imams, etc., to write. So this is very important. Now what happened as a result of this mixture is indigenous people took up some of the ways the Muslims dressed, some of the ways that they performed some rituals. In fact, a Muslim prayer place where they do their namaz was used to pray to a Muslim god, which is very different from what it is ordinarily. I mean, you don't pray to a Muslim god, but they mixed it. They used to dress, put on a Muslim turban, etc. So what happened? Did they adopt Islam? No. They were still indigenous people, but it was kind of a mixing. Azuma, the scholar in Arab Islamic colonization of Africa, does not call it syncretism. It's a kind of a mixing. They're putting on the Muslim turban, they are doing some of their rituals, they're giving the kids Muslim name, but they were still the indigenous, they belong to the indigenous African religion. The same thing happened in the Indian subcontinent. They really didn't convert. This is the Jihad al-Qawal, or the Jihad of preaching. Slowly what happened, this happened both in the subcontinent and in Africa, because these are kin groups and this is strange. And one of your entry to the kin group, and I talked about this is very much in the feminist theory, is the transaction of women marrying. And we have seen this in colonial times. It's always the colonized women who are married, which is why we have this race of mestizos in Southwest US and all along Central America and so forth. So marrying is a mixing of races. Not only that, you have an inroad into the culture. You're no longer a stranger in the enclavement. Zonga. The same thing in the Indian subcontinent. This mixture was very important in the royalty. We have seen this. Usually the colonized women were taken and their wombs were used. But the relationship was established. Remember, we said what Gail Rubin said, marriage is really a transaction of a woman between two tribes to establish that kinship bondage. So now the Zongas, the strangers, have an inroad into the mainstream, the indigenous community. This is the same as Africa, as in the Indian subcontinent and elsewhere in colonization. Does this legacy have anything to do with the present love jihad? Well, it's very difficult to say, and that's what I'm going to talk about in my next videos. This is a fact that happened and always happened during colonization, the intermixture of blood. And it's institutionalized when there's a relationship. I'm sure they exchanged other stuff, commodities, one's healing, I talked about it, the amulets and the charms, and then writing, they gave their services in the court, but still they didn't have entry. You cannot have entry into another tribe unless there's kinship. And these societies, indigenous communities, are all kinship based. So marriage did happen. Now, is this a legacy of the modern love jihad? It's not so clear, but I'm going to talk about it in the context of feminist theory in my next lectures. But it's very important for us to understand that this al-Qawal, the jihad through preaching, was not enough, because these people never really converted. They had an ambiguous kind of identity. They would wear Muslim turbans and so forth in Africa, the same in the Indian subcontinent. So the next step that happened in Africa, especially in Nigeria, in Western Africa, was the jihad of the sword, forcible conversion. How are all these related to our modern theory of love jihad? Is it a myth? Is it a reality? That we will explore in the next video. For today, that is all. Please do not forget to subscribe, like, comment, and if you can donate to our organization, we can continue to go and do this video. Please go to our website, which is swakah.in, and you will see all my writings on exactly this issue. And as I'm going to make it more complex and bring up the love jihad, those writings are also there. And I'm continuously uploading my blogs. That's all for today. Namaskar.